Today on the podcast, we have one of the most exciting podcast guests that I think we've had so far. This is someone that I've really tried to get to come in and has a massive amount of knowledge in his specialist area. Today we welcome Tom Tsangarides. Tom is a teacher and a coach, but Tom specialises in working in inclusive coaching. And I know from my experiences of working in grassroots football that a lot of coaches struggle with players that may have an additional need, or if they've got a player with a disability, how do they make the environment right for them so that they can thrive and enjoy it as much as everyone else? So Tom comes in and discusses, first of all, what inspired him to focus on children and adults with a disability and making his coaching sessions more inclusive. He will discuss about the key principles in grassroots coaching that you should keep in mind when you are coaching individuals with a disability. We also cover some hard topics such as language we use and how we describe people, and how that for some coaches it can be quite intimidating because you've got the best intentions in the world but you don't want to say the wrong thing to upset anyone. So he helps out a little bit with that. There's stuff on how we create a positive environment for everyone in the sessions and how Tom does this in his sessions. But there's loads of tips and advice for grassroots coaches based around Tom's ADAPT model that he's built. This is really useful for every coach at every level. So please make sure you listen through this with carefully. You might want to take some notes, you might want to write things down, but you've got a really good podcast coming up. I hope you enjoy it and there's lots of good tips for you. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Thank you very much.
As always, we always start off learning a little bit about people we're talking to. Can you tell us about your background in general and how that's kind of led to you getting into inclusive coaching as you're working now?
Yeah, sure. There's probably two parts to it. There's the early part as a youth myself, where sport for me was always somewhere that gave me boundaries, commitment, all those good things that sport brings. But I wasn't the easiest kid at school, so I suppose looking back now, the inclusive side of that is me kind of giving back to what I would have liked to as a young person. And then the coaching / teaching side, I trained as a primary teacher, so I got my first teaching job locally in Thanet, and then I taught in Whitstable. And during my teaching days, it was always the case that I gravitated towards the children with the behaviour needs, additional needs. I was the place, the classroom, they got sent at break times going to see Mr. T, as I was known then, surname Tsangarides, difficult for the kids to pronounce, so I was Mr. T, and it was doing those roles, behavioural coordinator roles. I ended up starting I wanted to consider a role where I could combine the additional needs support but with PE. As much as I love primary teaching, there were days that I had to go in and teach things like music, and I'm not going to show you now, but singing's not my forte. The French, you stick it on, and there's those days I thought maybe I can do a job where I actually enjoy the subject every day. So the PE side of things was natural to me, and if I could combine that with the inclusion element within teaching. So I went out and about and looked at different roles, and I was really lucky actually. It's one of those things where you turn up somewhere for a visit, and I didn't realise they were actually going to be recruiting a PE teacher. So I arranged a visit, walked around a school in Ashfield called Goldwyn. It's a school for SEMH needs, social, emotional, mental health needs. And I loved the vibe as soon as I got there. It operated as a secondary school, but on a lot smaller scale to cater for children's needs. And my job there was to be PE coordinator, alongside when they find out you're primary trained in a secondary school, you're like gold because they can schedule in some English and maths alongside your role to fill some gaps. So I did a bit of that. And really it was that job where I was a PE coordinator with these children with additional needs in a sport environment where I had to really work on the cohesion within sport, because as we know, especially in schools, we always have them on the go in PE. They're not at desks. There's always the confrontation options. So it was about how I can make PE engaging for not just the sporty kids that already want to engage, but actually children with different needs that may not like traditional sport. So that's where my inclusion within sport started to grow. And then while doing that is when I started to look in the community in regards to what I do with inclusive sport, to try and kind of mirror the provision we had in special schools for children with additional needs in sport, but in the community, which is where inclusive sport was born. And then obviously that did okay, so I come out of teaching to do that, and that's where I am now.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's really interesting you talking about your school when you was at school and your enjoyment of sport there, because I know you was very sporty.
Sure.
And generally good at sports.
Yeah.
We probably need to have a few competitive games at various sports, but
yeah.
you are good at sports.
Sure.
What happened at school then that made you not feel involved? Because typically, if you're good at sport, you enjoy PE and you feel like you're one of the main people there.
Yeah, so it's a really good point, because I'm quite unique in that way, where I am actually a good, decent sports person, but I really focus on what sports brings rather than skill development. So it wasn't such the enjoyment of PE in secondary school. And actually, my PE teachers were my champions. So actually, you are right. My being good at sport, I went to a grammar school. And I grew up in an environment where education wasn't as valued as much as it would in a traditional family, especially in the grammar school environment. So I felt different to my peers within that environment from the start. And when you're 11 to 16, you don't know you're projecting certain things until you look back in later life. So where I realised I wasn't from the same backgrounds as my friends in the in school, the only way I knew I could get by is being a cheeky kid, and that's the polite way of putting it, showing and using my physical abilities to get by. And so that didn't go down well with the school, as you can imagine. So daily, it was my PE teachers going, Tom can't do detention because he's got a fixture. That saved me. Or putting their arm around me to save me getting myself into more trouble. So yeah, it was a bit of a juxtaposed schooling experience, because that's why I look at sport as actually, without the sport in that environment, I probably would have gone in a different direction. And then getting into half decent football early really helped that, because then actually I had something to channel my professionalism potentially and my reputation locally into.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't think sport is given enough value in general in school.
Sure.
Maths, English, etc. Sports always think it gets cancelled first when there's exams on, etc.
Yeah, that's true.
And I also don't like the fact that we won't go into the kind of medals for everyone type thing. I haven't got a problem with everyone getting a participation medal. Yeah. But I believe the kids that then work extra to be really good at sports should get something on top of that.
Yeah.
Because we should value people. We should value people taking part and enjoying it, especially if you don't excel at sport. But we also should value people that work really hard to try and improve things.
And I agree, because it's also what that brings children, young people generally, resilience, coping mechanisms for failure, which they don't have that early. Secondary school's filled with exams, which is a lot about pass or fail. And if they haven't, what sport does bring is you should learn to win well and lose well. And if we go away from that in a primary environment, children will lack the resilience going into secondary school, because it's just not experienced in PE in primary school. And I do agree with you as well, because that bit that you said at the start about acknowledging everyone within trying to be involved is especially more important from an inclusion side, because there'll be children there that may not be sporty people down the line, but they're still in the same class environment as their peers. So you can balance out recognition for participation as well as excellence at the same time.
Yeah. So we're talking now about being inclusive, inclusion, etc. But what does that, in general in sport, what does that mean to you? And then let's kind of, obviously we're mainly working with grassroots coaches, coaches on the podcast. So in general in sport, what does inclusive mean to you? And then in terms of grassroots football more specifically, what does inclusive mean to you?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the inclusion can mean different things to different people. And sometimes what it's as a word, it sounds great, but what is it in action, in general environments? And for me, going back to the question, what does inclusion mean? An environment where people want to enjoy sport, for them to do so. It's just an environment, welcomed, and it's not exclusive. So it's not setting up anything where people can't do it, but trying to create an environment from anyone's entry point, abilities, can be involved in sport. Some people think inclusion may be regardless of needs, abilities, disabilities, all in together, because that's inclusive. But I would say, actually, you could argue that's not inclusive, because someone who may be limited mobility, young person with cerebral palsy, may need a slightly different approach to football or an environment or an activity without 12 to 20 kids running around, but a smaller group size. So an inclusive session for them would actually be changing what you do, as opposed to just say, yeah, we're inclusive, everyone joining along together. And I made that mistake very early with inclusive sport, I set up the session originally and said, yeah, we'll take all different children's needs, and that was a learning process for myself. Actually, that's not what inclusion is, because it's not the most suitable environment. It's a good starting point because you're not sending anyone away, but actually the best inclusive environment is one where every child can flourish to the best of their ability. And similar for football, with pathways, and you've got different disability pathways, it's a similar conversation. I think in an education system, we use terms like mild, moderate needs, talking about children's different needs. And I think the mild needs, where children may be in mainstream schools but maybe have autism or ADHD, that's where grassroots coaches may be able to include them in their typical session with a slightly different approach, patience, and it's not necessarily in the delivery of the activities, the drills as such, more in how they treat them, give them a bit more time, maybe a little bit more instruction, maybe a little bit less expectation. But then when you get down to the, as I said earlier, moderate needs, where the children's needs are so at a point where they actually need a smaller group size, that's when you start to look at that pan disability parallel provision, which hopefully more and more grassroots clubs are looking at doing, because I think, you probably know better than me, that part of the charter now for FA, there is a pan disability requirement, which is great, because then if that comes from the FA, clubs now have to look at it. And I think, and most clubs don't, they want to, they just need guidance.
Yeah, I think the reality is in grassroots football, there's probably a lot of kids with those mild needs, and that's probably where I would say coaches struggle the most. Now, in my experience, I've had limited coaching experience working with groups with a disability. I've done it at Thanet College years ago when I first started coaching, and I got a real lesson quick, because my boss, Bob, said to me, he went, like, if we're gonna, like, you can do some passing if you want to, like, pass it into the players, help them out and stuff like that. He goes, but don't hold on to the ball. He's like, if you get the ball, just pass it. And then I got the ball, and after a little while I took a few too many touches, and I got clattered, sent about 10 foot in the air by that young lad who was strong as anything, but no malice or anything there, just his balance, coordination, understanding was. So that was a real big lesson for me. But what I would say is the group we worked with is probably the most enjoyable part of our week, because of how much they enjoyed it. But they weren't mild needs; they were higher than that.
Yeah.
In typical grassroots settings, you will get a lot of kids ADHD, autism, etc., etc. And I think that's what coaches really find as a challenge. But you see from your perspective there, it's patience, empathy, and I think a lot of coaches really want to help, they just don't know how to. Yeah, and I think you are right, because when we look at those children, as we're referring to as mild needs, where it's not explicitly a need, they're in this grey area with, even in schools support, and it's the same in schools. I was a teacher, as I said at the start, in primary schools and secondary schools, and those children wouldn't be getting the extra adult support in class, but they still got slight needs where I'm having to differentiate activities to try and help them. So if you take that classroom environment into a grassroots coaches environment, they've got the same issue. They're still needing a little bit more of the coach's time, but the coach is still trying to manage the group as a whole, who also need their time. So what I would say is the most important thing is to not worry and not feel like you're going to do anything wrong, because every parent generally that you can speak to about their children's needs is welcome to have the conversation. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a worry that they might cause offence by speaking to parents, but generally from our experience, parents can't wait to tell you how you can support their child, because they're the experts. The parents live with them day to day. There's terms like what triggers them and things like that you can speak to about them, or sometimes it's a sensory thing, sometimes it'd be a colour. And why sometimes we wait to find out, and actually that's sometimes the worst way, because then it's during a session and it can escalate. But as soon as as long as there's, and this is another, we're jumping over in my brain, get a bit of popcorn brain here, but when your sign up processes, there's normally now somewhere where parents can declare a additional need part, and it's how you word that is important, because you don't want parents to feel like you're going to use it against them for accessibility, or sorry, we can't cater for your child, because often that's what they're worried about, because they're used to that in the community or going to different, or even schools. So if you word it something along the lines of any additional needs or awarenesses we should have so we can best cater for your child,
So then they're welcome to say it to you. And then when you see that on your form or your registration of interest, it's really helpful if you have a phone call conversation. And I know there might be lots of people sitting there going, who's got the time to do that? But generally grassroots clubs have welfare officers and things like that. That could be something on their responsibility to do, because that conversation, you'll get so much more from a parent. As long as you put them at ease, we can't wait to welcome so-and-so along. We saw that they've got additional needs on the form. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that? And then they'll come out with all the little things that you can put together in a notes, whatever it is on your systems that you use. So then when the child comes along, you're already pre-warned about those kind of things that might trigger them. Sometimes it's sharing bibs, so you already think about, okay, maybe that child has its own bib each session because they struggle with go and get little things that you say, go and get yourselves bibs. That's already a conflict point potentially, because you're like, I want that colour, and then, whereas you might be pre-warned and go, actually that's always going to be your bib. And little things like that can make a real difference.
Which is every conversation is the most important part, because I'm thinking now I've got two stories from my coaching. One was actually last week. One was when I was coaching at academy level. I had a player that I coached for years who always seemed distracted, didn't seem to pay loads of attention. And then he talked to his parents, so they don't just found out, and they were brilliant, and he was a really good kid, and the parents were really supportive, but he couldn't see the colours on the whiteboard.
Okay, wow.
So we do loads of work on whiteboards.
So it's a visual.
And so it was like, right, I want these players to go here, this, that, and then it's like, but actually he couldn't see what I was doing.
I'm guessing the background was white.
Yeah, in the background was white, so I didn't know that. So then once I found out, it was like, right, just make sure that I have the conversation with that player. And to be fair, like I say, he's a good player. He's now playing at a very good level of football, but there's probably 2 years where I could have been helping him more than I did. And then there was one last week, a coach I worked with, he was like, that kid, he goes, I think he used to be a bit hard on the kids sometimes. He was older, but he's like, he needs to have the last kick of the football. So when I say, right, everyone come in, he has to touch the football last. And if he doesn't touch the football last, you can see him. So I watched him, and he kicked it as he goes, I just let him do it now. I make sure he gets the last touch of the football. So I watched him when he went, right, everyone come in, this kid's kicked a ball in the goal. And then about a second later, someone else kicked a ball. And I saw the kid like looking around, like, what do I do? And he just found the ball and kicked it. But he was into the group maybe 10 seconds after everyone else. But actually that coach had the conversation with the parents. Parents said he needs this, this and this. And that's nothing, for a coach, that's nothing to be bothered about. The coach, excellent, was just like, yeah, no problem.
That's good.
Where the difficulty I see sometimes comes with coaches' understanding of individuals' needs, but then also trying to balance up. They see the need as sometimes just bad behaviour. But where is that balance? Because actually, is there a point where you go, right, I'm trying to teach these standards and rules. But if I change everything for one player, what's the knock-on effect to the others?
There's and I'm not sitting here today to pretend I've got all the magic answers and things, but what I would suggest that it makes those issues easier to overcome is when you talked about you're trying to create rules and routines, for example, you might want to consider, rather than having rules on don't do this or do that, as in specific things that can happen, making it around values. Because if you say we don't kick the equipment, which sounds like a really clear restriction to put in, but some children who are just really active and hyperactivity, a kick in the cone, it's just something that just happens, but not because what we think they're doing be disrespectful. Whereas wherever you put the rules and like the culture of the club, if you put it into values about honesty and effort and those things, it means you've got more room to be flexible or as much as you choose. So that's the first thing I'd say, try and create a culture rather than rules that can be broken. Because if you start, as you know, if you start putting things, especially if children are having a bad day, it's almost like a challenge to them, isn't it? Oh, I'm not supposed to do that. So if I break that rule, I'm going to get the attention that I want. So that's the first thing, which I know sounds quite fluffy, but once you get your whole team on board, which is the idea of culture creation, it starts to self-police itself. So that's one thing. In regards to setting behaviour expectations, children with additional needs need them just as much as their peers. And again, it comes back to the approach that you take in how you deal with the negative behaviour. it still needs to be addressed. I don't think, and I'm not speaking on behalf of children, the parents of children with additional needs, but I can only speak from my experience. They are just as keen for their children to realise there are boundaries. There are things that you shouldn't do. There are values you shouldn't be representing or should. So they're very on board with that, I hate the word punishment system or sanctions, but actually they want them to have boundaries too. But what's probably the better thing to do is not do these things as what you could do traditionally, and PE teachers do it all the time, coaches do it all the time, is in front of the group, don't do that, normal approach, because it's busy, but that public addressment is what's going to make that child's experience be even worse. What you can do generally is try and do something that distracts everyone else from the behaviour that's going on, and then address it quietly on a one-to-one level, and then offer that. If you're struggling, there's a chance you to go and self-regulate by sitting down. Use different terminology to the children, but as soon as you go public, it's actually then becomes a interaction problem, because depending on how old the child is, if it's like a teen, they've already learned that routine of behaviour is, if I get shouted at, I'm going to give it back. So they're experts in that. So the last thing you actually want to be doing is get dragged into a don't do that and to and fro. But if you acknowledge what's happened and wait for your moment, because these children, if you try and get to them generally when they're up here, because they're excited playing football, it's an arousing thing to do, your emotions are over the place, you're not going to get the point through. But what you can do in your culture creation, most kids will understand that there's a child that's got different needs to them. And if we all know that it may not look like it's being addressed, but don't worry, leave it with me, we'll have a chat with so-and-so. And at the end of the session, when they're cooling down, a bit more relaxed, a little sit down with them. You know, earlier when let's just use swearing for example, because it must, as a behaviour thing, that's quite common. You used that word, didn't you? Do you think that we do that in this club? And that one-to-one conversation, they're more likely to be remorseful and receive it because it's on a one-to-one level and they haven't got the saving face in front of their peers issue. So I think finding the moments with particularly children with additional needs is really important, because then your relationship with them doesn't become a negative cycle of I shout at you, you shout at me. You actually want to work alongside them, generally, appreciated. And there's a time and a place where if it's dangerous, if there's an element of hitting other children, that's when someone does need to shout and it does need to stop straight away.
So we've gone through quite a lot there, but what would you say the key principles are when a grassroots coach is working with children or adults with a disability? If you had to lay down some key principles for them as a coach, what would they be?
See, these principles, approaches, I think it's much more simple to go down the how you'd like your own children to be treated route. So, because if you start using these buzzwords like consistent or
empathy.
Yeah, they're words, aren't they? That in an ideal world, everyone would be in society. So I don't want to sound preachy.
Yeah.
But especially with the disability population, it's think about where they are and what they are in their life. Because someone's disabilities, they all live their disabilities differently. So we can't generalise and say everyone with autism acts like this, or everyone with a limited mobility. But what they all will be open to receive is dialogue, conversation, and honesty. And it's about, as I said at the start, if you sent your child along to anywhere and you turned up and they're sat to the side because the coach hasn't included them, and that can happen, how would you feel as a parent? You'd be upset, you'd want to know why. It's the same thing. If the coaches are willing to have conversations, talk to parents if it's age appropriate, sometimes teenagers come along themselves, if they get talked to about things, they feel like people are trying their best. It's when you are avoiding the dialogue, when issues would be caused, because the parent will assume it's because you're just leaving them out, and actually it's because you're just lacking the confidence to include them. So really, principally, it's just going back to that general welcoming, being a good person and actually willing to have conversations.
You said in there, obviously, autism, ADHD, no kids are the same, which people listening will be like, oh, I just want the solution.
Magic answer, yeah, sure.
And there isn't magic answers. Conversations with parents, like you said, getting to know them, building a relationship with them. But are there kind of let's use ADHD and autism as two different ones, because I think they're the ones I get asked about.
Yeah, sure.
Are there kind of things you can try, or just things that
little nuggets?
Little nuggets.
Okay.
Help those
so again, just from my experience,
Yeah.
so I'd just like to say that I've been doing it for 10 years in various settings, schools and in community. let's go with the autism route. Again, massive umbrella, so we're not generalising here, but there are general things children of autism may experience that you can do that will help them. One of the things is not knowing where to be. All right, so when we do our drills or even activities where I'm going to use real basic activities, but when you're waiting to shoot, right? Generally, you might say, it depends how organised you are as a coach, but generally you'd be like, oh, you queue up over there, and then we're going to pass the ball in, lay it off, you're going to shoot. Right? There's these spots you can buy, not raised cones, there's flat markers. Yeah. Those things can be, for a community coach, grassroots coach, for children generally anyway, because you know what children are like when they're waiting around, that's when they start to mess around and things. Having those spots of where clearly you need to be and wait is a comfort thing. They'll find that more, I know I need to stand on this spot. And if no one else has got a spot, just as long as that's not seen as them being different, they want to be empowered to have the spot. Not like, you have to have this, you kids don't. So either go all in on spots, because it's just helpful anyway, or have a conversation like, this is where, whenever I put this, that's where you wait. That's where you're going to be. Because sometimes it's that, when you're in the sea sometimes, when you feel like you swim a bit out of depth a bit, and then you're out of depth and you feel, it's quite an overwhelming feeling, isn't it, in the sea, and then you realise how vast, that's a similar feeling they'll be experiencing, because to us, we're just in a football pitch, but it's a bigger space to them. So if you give them the spot to stand on, or whatever it is, that'll make them feel safe, they know where I need to be. And then you can build on from that. Positionally, that's another thing that could be helpful, but I mean on just like during an activity, a session, or even when you're waiting to start, it's just a comfort thing. So that's something you can do. How you communicate, definitely about coaches are I think you'd know better than me, but coaches are being told to say less is more now, which is also helpful for children with additional needs, because a big monologue like I'm doing today is not going to be, they're going to take in the first 10 seconds generally. So clear instructions slowly. And what's often helpful, because what you'll do is, right, everyone get that? And it's a very common thing that people say, like they do their little introduction, or this is what we're going to do today, kids. Everyone got that? And everyone goes, yeah, good. But no one's actually had a chance to say, I don't get that. So there's two things you can do. You can say, does anyone not understand? Because that's actually what you want to know. Rather say, does everyone get that? Yeah. Well, that's great. We want to go, is there anyone here that doesn't know what to do? Because then actually they're the people you can keep with you. And then if there's those children you know that struggle with instruction, I have a quick question. What are you doing today? Get them to tell you back. If they can't tell you back, you haven't listened, then you can go, oh, okay, let's go through it together. So that's a little thing you can do to see children understand what you ask them to do. Going to the other side now, the ADHD side of things, which is more about hyperactivity, harder to contain, I guess, if in a football environment, because they just want to run around the whole time, for argument's sake. So again, clear space is really useful, because if you just put a cone out and then a big goal, and you're using the 18-yard box, for example, there's still a big space. So really, and I'm sure you teach this anyway, but clear space of where the activity is going to be is helpful, because it almost brings if you think about panoramic photo, that's loads to take in, where actually you just want what's in front of them. So that helps. Allow for differences in how they wait to listen to instruction. So again, I come from a teaching background, and in schools in this country particularly, we get them sat down a lot, don't we? And you wouldn't have it in the workplace generally. People would complain bad backs and stuff, but we're a bit behind in some of the countries in education. But for those children who are hyperactive, if you're expecting them always to, some sit down on the floor as you're talking, which is good generally because you know they're listening, you might want to allow them to stand. You might want to give those little bits of allowing that energy to be funneled through rather than expecting them to be still. And then the last thing with the children with ADHD is, and this is another common trait of sporty coaches, PE teachers, we are normally quite energetic ourselves because we love our sports, right? And I'm deliberately today trying not to be my hyperactive self, as you know, because I talk really fast. So that's an example of what I'm doing today for the sake of this conversation. But the same when you're talking to children with ADHD, they will want to play off your energy. So if you're going in, right kids, and I don't want to break the mic today, right kids, we're going to do this, they go, okay, I'm going to do this and this. And you're there, absorb your energy, which in some environments you want that because you want everyone, but with children with ADHD, actually sometimes speaking slower like I'm doing today and saying, right, Louis, your task today is going to be this. Is that all right for you? And you can do a little soft thing. And what you'll do is you'll bring their emotional temperature, as a saying, down rather than, and then when they score, right? And this happens, like, and we do this in the community, so I'm forever helping my coach with this. Generally, when a kid scores, you want to go, "Rah, well done," or "What an amazing goal, come here," which is amazing. But for a child who struggles to self-regulate their own emotions, you're going to probably make them even more to the point where they're overstimulated. So it's actually like, "Oh, come here, high five, fist bump."
Yeah.
So then they can go and wait for their turn again. Because your problem you'll get in sport is those children will normally cause issues because they're overexcited, not because they're genuine. And then the overexcitement ends into something overly physical, and that's when the negative thing happens. But it was actually from a place of them being so supercharged. So if you can find ways of, or you know that happens. So when they score, their routine is they do a celebration, which is a lap of the pitch, for example, gets that energy out and they're back to come. So it's a knowing your players, but actually looking at their emotions differently. Autism, generally, you might want to G up with praise. Children with ADHD are so up here, you might need to bring down with what you speak to them.
How do you, and this is, like you said, you've not got the answer, but here's
Go on.
for you then. How do you manage that on a match day?
Well, when you say how does you, as in the grassroots coach of the team, because there's two sides in the match as well, isn't there?
I'll look at it and I'll go, right, from an idealist point of view,
Yep.
if I'm running a match,
Yep.
I will be chilled out, relaxed,
Yep.
let players make decisions, let players play.
Sure.
But there's always that, even if you can keep all the parents quiet,
Yeah.
and the other team's parents quiet,
Yeah.
there's still that emotion of we're playing a competitive match, which is naturally going to heighten all of that. So is it then, right, coping strategies of, if you score a goal, you come to me, every time you score a goal, we'll have a high five, I'll redo one of your shoelaces up or whatever to reset. Is that the type of thing?
And I would say in a competitive environment it's less of a problem because you want them to be stimulated in a game.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to dilute children from scoring and not having their moment. I think in a training environment this would be more appropriate for, but in a competitive environment, I think yes, knowing that their routine is to come and reset somewhere, it means there's an opportunity of them to be brought down. You're doing really well, as you say, find a strategy, or maybe it's a drink, because that's also a really good de-escalator because they think they're hydrating. So
because I'm thinking like well actually, like you said, it's really important that they've got that energy and excitement. But actually, if it's getting to the point of thinking they might be about to boil over.
And that boil over term, yes, exactly that. And I see it like these days, gaming's really popular and things, and on computer games they have bars over their head, like stamina levels and all those kind of things. I almost see it like that. If you saw their excitement gauge or their temperature, emotional temperature, and there's a red zone, and I could go into like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all the, where you identify the stages of a meltdown, which children have in behaviour schools. It's like how to de-escalate that curve from coming up. So when we're at this point, there's still a chance. If we leave it too late, you just got to let them have the meltdown because it's too late. So it's about, as you said, strategies that's going to, not reactive, that we just, oh no, he's really excited, or it looks like he's bubbling over, as you say. Have it as just part of routine, and it could benefit, if I'm honest, generally stuff can benefit all children, because if they know that, like if you've got a captain who's normally a good organiser generally in your team, if they know after the goal, high five, but then have a quick huddle, decompress, now get into positions again. Little things like that are probably good for all players, because they always say you're most vulnerable when you score for a reason in football, don't they? Because you're normally so excited from scoring, your brain's gone off the focus. So I think some of these strategies it's important to try and implement across the board so that children don't feel like they're being singled out in a certain way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what advice would you, actually we've done a little bit about advice for talk to parents, etc. What about if coaches feel a bit intimidated by it? Because one, they don't have knowledge, two, they've not done it. And if I think back to when I wasn't intimidated by it, but because I didn't know what to do in certain situations when working with children with additional needs. So for example, the one that I always struggled with was when they come and hug you or touch you, and I was like, wait,
tactile.
When I've worked in grassroots or in mainstream schools, it's like, no, you don't. But actually, some of the kids would just come up and grab you, you wouldn't even notice and stuff like that. And I'll be honest, I would kind of like freeze. I'm like, no, that's not.
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable because I don't know what the standards are.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by intimidated by the situations sometimes.
Yeah, as a male in a primary school, I had that issue quite a lot, because in primary schools, children are 5 to 11 years old, and if they fall over, they want a hug. And that's just children. And as a parent of a child in a school, you wouldn't want your child to just not get that hug that they need to make themselves feel better. And then when you're a male having that hug, you're in that awkward environment where a little girl's giving you a hug. Is that appropriate? Is it acceptable? So through my teaching days, yes, it completely is acceptable, but there's ways you can position yourself to make it the most safe or appropriate to do it. So typically, if you're about to get a hug ambush, you want to just turn them to your side. For obvious reasons of where they're positioning their bodies. If you see a child is running up to your arms, you don't want to say, oh no, we don't do hugs, because actually that child's learning emotion. And so you can go, turn to your side, so it's a hip cuddle. And then it's about whether or not it was the right time or appropriate to be hugged. And if it's not, then it's do you remember, it's training time now. We don't hug during training because we're doing football. So it's a simple thing where if it's after they've just scored their first goal or free kick in training, there's probably a reason why they want to hug, because they feel like they've achieved something, which I would advise is safe to do so. The FA, their safeguarding advice on the website suggests all these things when you go through the level 1, so it does do it in certain detail. But what I would say the differences with additional needs is they're less aware that they're crossing boundaries. So what you wouldn't want to do is make them feel sad and reject them, and it's about, okay, that's going to happen. So now I know it's going to happen, I need to speak to what the rules are at home, because generally the parents will be aware that they are overly tactile. Speak to the parents when they do this in public or at school, what's the strategies? And because grassroots kids are all in school generally, the parents will have strategies from school. They say no hands time, for example. Some children are overly touchy during the session, so they say things like no hands. So it's not a big, we don't do hugging and touching. When the coach is coaching and they can see one of the children getting tactile, so-and-so, no hands, and that's a strategy they have in school. So it's about learning again, there's no same strategy for all, but as long as it's done in a way that the children feel like it's learning what's appropriate rather than being told off, I think that's really important, because it's a place of kindness really, isn't it, a hug and stuff, but they also need to know, again, going back to what I said there about parents with SEN children want boundaries to be enforced. So really it comes back to, and schools, I don't know how much grassroots coaches and clubs dip into the schools advice, but they are the best place, because we have the same in our community sessions. We can have someone turn up with additional needs that we're not aware of, or we don't want to turn them away. So we can, if we've got such good relationships with local schools, and they're really keen for those children to be involved in community stuff anyway. So you can ask to speak to a Senko, who generally is the person in the school that knows all these things, and I get permission from the parent, and then they go, oh, we do this, this and this, or it's a little flashcard that we show, so then they know it's what they're not meant to do or do.
And I think, like you said earlier, every club's got a welfare officer. Actually, this could be a good role for a welfare officer. And
not just welfare is in a bad way, because welfare officers deal with, don't they, well-being, if my understanding is correct. And that's really important, but why not give them also something that's a positive role to be doing, which is helping children's engagement in the session be better by just finding out what their strategies are. Yeah, I think that would be really good.
I think the other thing about feeling intimidated by it as well, especially with the modern world, and this is something that I openly say really irritates me, is your wording. So is it a disabled child? Is it a child with a disability? And it's not, and it's just, people are so worried, and coaches who don't understand of it, you're so worried about saying the wrong thing and then getting a backlash for it, that you won't say anything, or you won't
work with those population groups.
So in terms of yourself, what kind of wording are there any wording no-goes?
Yeah, so what you said at the start are a good starting point, and by the way, it evolves. Language, like we know in other parts of our society, at 1 minute you can say that, and then it's been re-owned and you can say it. So that happens. It's like the BAME acronym. That's now seen as grouping people too much, and that they reject that term. And I've had that people who work for the government use that term to me, and I will politely just remind them in a helpful way, because someone else might take offence. And I think that in our society we need to get better of that. And I'll do the same if I was working with a group of I do inclusive training. If someone says there's slightly wrong terminology, I wouldn't go, oh, what, we don't say that in front of everyone. But when I get a chance at a coffee, I'll say, just so you're aware, people might receive that in a slight way. This is probably the better way around to do it. And people were like, oh goodness, I didn't realise. Yeah, that's why I'm not jumping down your throat when you said it. So that's important. So hopefully, but the one thing you said at the start, disabled child with disability. Generally, we need to avoid putting a disorder or the need first. So if you think about it in a title for someone, you're you first, then you have these issues, or you have these disorders, or you have these additional needs. So a really good starting place. And parents will appreciate when they hear it, because it's more natural to say the disabled child in our language generally, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what they'd appreciate more is the child or Jim who's got additional needs. Yeah. So not autistic Jim. Yeah. Actually, Jim who's autistic, because it's putting the child first, and then they have additional needs. So that's a real easy starting point. Always think about putting the child, the name first, and what needs they've got is an additional after.
Yeah, because I think it's people worry about it so much. I understand why as well. Some people, like you said there, will absolutely jump down your throat when you have no ill meaning.
And we've had the same. So I've learned, even in the work that we do, which is championing these population groups, there's things, for example, we put a stock image, which are on social media when you're using photos to promote sessions. Stock image is one of those ones that's just in the clip art or online as a stock image, so it's not one of the beneficiaries or children. And it was only a cancellation post. It was no football, one of those football sessions was cancelled. So you just putting an image of it is just what looks better for people to see. But someone raised, which is a very fair point, that image is quite clearly not someone like the sessions for disabled, and would prefer it to be representative of the children that actually attend. So it's a learning curve for us. You could go down the argument then about children with autism, how they look different anyway. So that's another level to that conversation. But the point was fair. If we're a disability provider and we've got a chance to, we're doing an announcement, we should probably be using representative people in our, and when we do our branding generally, of course we do that. It was a whip up a quick announcement post, find an image, but they were so pristine and happy looking, it was almost like they felt like that's not representative of the children that attend a session.
And that's something so we done a podcast with Lee Suter.
We
had conversations with him, and one of the most interesting things from him was I'd ask him questions about women's football, disability, all the things they're trying to implement at the club and doing really well. And his response a lot of the time was, you need to get people represented. So he's like, who am I to tell you what people need? Like female football players need, for example. So clubs need to, on their boards, on the people that run it, they need to get people that are representative to then help with the education and make sure it is inclusive for everyone that's attending that club.
Yeah, that's very true.
Just you mentioned there, and we'll go off on a little bit of a tangent. Do you do work with grassroots clubs to help them teach you? Can you tell us about what you do with that?
Yeah, so we, as an organisation, Inclusive Sport, we can partner with clubs to deliver pan disability provision, because sometimes, unlike what we talked about earlier, if you're lucky enough to have someone within your volunteering parents that has a child with additional needs, then they'll be happy to run the pan disability provision. So sometimes we partner with clubs to run that for them. But the training aspect, we run a ADAPT training, which is the training model that I've invented for all the work that we've done in the community, to deliver a training course where coaches just pick up those little nuggets we spoke about, but in a more formal format. And generally, the difficulty though you have, and funny you mentioned Lee earlier, we did this course for Lee's coaches. They need to buy in, and they need to see why it's important. So I think that has to be work from the club, because they're volunteers. Even if the training's funded from the club, which it generally is how you get the coaches to buy in, to value it. And I think the sell isn't, it's for pan disability, it's what you said earlier, those mild children, it's going to help you cater for. So the ADAPT model, have we got time to go into it now?
Go for it.
So the ADAPT model, I'll be honest, you may have recalled in your CPD's experience at some point the STEP principles. So it's bread and butter, existed since 1994, on how to differentiate PE sport and be inclusive. And STEP, space, task, equipment, people. And they've done a little extra letter recently, I can't remember what it is. But to me, that's existed from 1994, which is a great starting point. But I think some of the language even in it itself was started to be outdated. For example, task. We know the word task has negative connotations because it sounds like something you have to do. So even little things like that, a task, you wouldn't use that language for children anymore, or young people in schools. Other things like limiting equipment. So the word equipment is looking like the solution to your problems is just getting a specialist bit of equipment to include people, which is very rare, sometimes very appropriate, i.e. a chair-based young person, you can put a ramp over the chair to allow them to send the ball because they can't use their legs potentially. So there is specialist equipment out there, but or a bigger sized ball for wheelchair users so it doesn't get stuck under the chair. Like, there is a place for certain equipment, but generally it's how you use your equipment that matters. So I looked at STEP and thought I would like to bring it to the modern day from my experience of working in special schools, delivering PE, running special needs programs across THANIT in our inclusive games, that's from children with real complex needs to mild needs. So I basically magpied STEP and turned it into ADAPT. So it's another acronym, because everyone loves an acronym. And to me already, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but ADAPT sounds like what you're trying to do. Yeah, STEP, in some ways,
Yes.
yeah, and also it's about a movement that some people who are trying to get involved in sport can't do. I know that sounds really pernickety, but if you're using STEP, some children are chair-based or young people or adults, it just seems just not quite right. So I started off with the ADAPT. I'm not going to go into massive detail about it. It is being fine-tuned and stuff, but the A is for, let me make sure I get this right because there's two A's in it. A is for activity, right? So just like in STEP you've got task, I've now used activity, which is a word that generally we say with children and young people more. That's your activity because it's active, it's something you're going to do and experience. And the activity has lots of bullet points in the training about where your starting point allows you to be more inclusive. So not putting in restrictions in your activity, your first activity that won't allow someone who struggles with coordination to be able to achieve. So already your first planning part, you've gone, okay, what is my activity as a starting point going to be able to be adjusted and adapted or paralleled? So that's the A. And then you've got, this is a bit teacher talk, D for differentiation. All right, so all the teacher people will go, they hate, probably sick of that word by the time they finish their teaching training, because every observation they get, how have you differentiated? Which is basically, you're going to do this, but you need a slightly different support, or you're working at a different level, so you're going to a slightly harder piece of work. You're going to have a slightly supported piece of work. So differentiate, and every coach does it when they're looking at children in actual sessions, because it might be how far away the cone is from the goal. So I'm going to use real rudimentary examples because it's easier for understanding. But when you're looking at, okay, I've got a child with additional needs coming in, what am I going to do differently to help them engage? And it's not always a different activity. Sometimes it can be different support. Sometimes it can be using peer support. Sometimes it can be actually a different outcome success. So for some children, being able to score, get points, they thrive from, and we need to keep, as we said earlier. But some, by going through the process, their reward is how many times can you try to do it? Can you beat last week when you did 5? But this week, so you see if you can do 6. So it's about attempting, so that you can differentiate by outcome, not just the activity. The second A is space from the STEP, but we called it area. Because space is where we just are doing something, which is still a good starting point, but area is actually the whole place. Because if you've got an inclusive session, or if you're trying to be a conclusive club, and your session is in a park where there's lots of different stimulation, dogs running around, your area to start off with is limiting those who can take part, for example. So it's the area where you are, environment, i.e. if you're doing indoor football at times, if you're in a hall with loads of clutter, especially if you're using indoor facilities and there's all these things out which are potentially causing overstimulation for someone who's struggling to concentrate, the area is a starting point. And then obviously, again, like space, historically, area is in the space you're using. Can you make it bigger, smaller, to make it either more challenging or to be easier to access? So changing space to area. The P, which was for people. So again, I've slightly changed it to personalities, because you often find in any leadership position with managing people, team, it's the personalities that make the difference, not just the person. So you know as a manager which people work better together, or who's better at motivating other staff to do things. And it's the same in children communities and their social interactions. You may be able to use the personality of another child who's really kind and caring and patient to buddy up with the child that needs extra support. So it's tapping, and the coaches, if you've got, I don't know if in Grassroots you're lucky enough to have more than one coach generally, but You sometimes have young helpers and things, and there might be one that's just so enthusiastic and passionate. Use that personality to support that child that's maybe lacking that confidence. So rather than just seeing it as people, which traditionally was work in groups, work in pairs, work in a whole group, work in 3 lots of 6s, now it's about not just that, but also the people, the personalities that can get the best out of each other. And the last one is, rather than equipment, I've gone for T for tools. And that's because the best piece of equipment in the session, if you can guess, who do you think it is?
You, coach, yeah.
And I don't mean that in like, but you are a tool.
Yeah.
And like I've said today about how I'm changing my voice at times, how my body language is represented, how I share out the praise within a session, how I share out the type of praise I give. You are the biggest tool in that session. So if you just do equipment, no one sees themselves as an equipment. And you're removing the fact that how you do everything is actually, when I talk back to that first session I did where I said everyone's welcome, the only way we got through it is by me just being positive the whole time and just praising everyone and trying to change expectation through it. It wasn't because we had specialist disabled equipment there. So we're trying to use T in a way that you are, and there's a nice little saying that I use in the training, which is like a tradesman, you've got a tool belt. The more tools you have in it, the more situations you can deal with, and that might be change of voice, that might be a soft touch when appropriate, it might be about changing expectation based on needs. So the more you practice different tools, the more situations you can deal with.
Just before we get to the last part of the podcast, it'd be great if you could follow the TSC Coaches Club on all social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow us for free on Patreon, and you can listen to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If you could subscribe to those channels, it will be a great help to us. Thanks again for listening. So, that's really important, that's really valuable, that stuff. And so I assume obviously when you do the training, then there's just loads of detail within each letter. Mm-hmm. So that's brilliant. And obviously we'll put the link to contact you in the description. Yeah, sure. So if anyone wants to contact you about the training and as an individual or as a club, sure, can get in touch. Just to kind of moving on then, and we've done some bits around this anyway, and you've talked about your kind of enthusiasm, but when to bring it down, when to keep it high. So in general, how can we make sure that coaches are creating a positive environment, but because we want just kids to enjoy themselves. Yeah. Because ultimately that's the aim. Loads of people will go on about winning and development and stuff like that, but enjoyment's got to be the main aim. So how would you structure a session to make sure that it's a positive environment for everyone?
Yeah, I think beyond making success be about the outcome, because I do think there is a place for that. You're in a sport, competitive sport, so there is a place for the enjoyment is from winning as such. You can change how successful that is based on define winning differently. So one of the things that when we go into schools and do other bits for children that are struggling with that cohesion or struggling to lose, because generally the really sporty kids are dominating the winning part. So one of the things that you can do to just change up the enjoyment is actually how we win as a whole. So just simply, this is just another crude example, but rather than they can have goals, there can be scores, but why doesn't that score be a collective score at the end that next time they do it, they've got to try and beat? So if the match ends 4-1, collectively it's a 5. So then next time, remember last week it was 4-1, can we see if it can be more goals this time? For example, because then there's enjoyment as to each team, but then there's the collective goal. And sometimes it might be more appropriate to do it versus the coach's score. Things like that, where actually now the team, so I'm going to take 10 penalties, however many I score as the coach is my score. Now you guys are going to play a game, how many you score is going to go up against my score. Because you're not going to, well, you probably will get upset when you lose, if you do. But then it's stopping that peer-to-peer unpleasant feeling of losing. They're still playing their game, and actually they might be happy when the opponent scores, because guess what? It's trying to beat coach's score. So little things like that, you can be creative and change. Children will push back when you start saying, okay, if you score but it doesn't count, we're not going to score that, but we're going to score every time you do 10 passes. You get a little bit more pushback on that because they know the feeling of scoring actually in the goal is much more enjoyable. So I think that's still got a place, but children start to see through that. So, and then it's about changing when it is time to score environment. So what we do in some of our sessions in the community and things is you be explicit with children about this part of my brain's just jumped to swimming, but a good example of this is in swimming. If you get your kids to go swimming lessons and things, generally there's some free time that they in pools, and swim teachers will go, if you do your lesson really well, we'll have free time. So that's children knowing this is the main enjoying fun part. Yeah, you've got to learn your stroke and learn how to position your head, which still should be fun if the swim teacher's doing it in a lovely way. But then at the end they go, right, now it's what do you want to do with your free time? Because in pools it's still supervised. They might be jumping in. Kids often choose that one. It's the same in your session. I don't know, you've been doing grassroots coaching a very long time. How often was there unstructured kind of just play time in your session?
Yeah, I think there's more now.
Right.
But in general it wasn't. There's always been the carrot on the stick of the match at the end.
Yes,
If you don't behave, you don't get the match. I mean, I do my unstructured free time when they arrive now.
But that's interesting, because I was just about to say, when you said about the carrot, it now becomes a reward or punishment system, doesn't it? Yeah. Because if the child has now, because of whatever reason, had a blow up or a meltdown, they're going to get it's going to be double sad for them, because they've already not behaved appropriately, and now they're going to miss out on a bit, which is the fun bit. And as you said, I would urge, and there's different theories about this, even in PE, because a PE teacher, a bit like yourself in grassroots coaches, will go skill development, warm up, skill development, apply to game. What if the children struggle so much to do the skill development they never get to play the game? Because that often happens, doesn't it? Because you're trying to teach them how to do, badminton's a good example because it's so technical, a serve, because they have to serve to start. So if you're working on a serve every week, they've never actually played the game. So you can just let them play the game badly and learn actually why it's important to be able to serve. And it's the same in football. If you let them start, and it's a good way for them to ease in as long as it's controlled and it's not balls flying everywhere and it's actually, but then they're actually all getting a taste of what football is for fun. And then when you say in your main session that this is helpful in this environment in a game, they've already got a reference point. Whereas if you're always waiting to the end as it's a reward for doing your skill development, it's actually not the enjoyment of the sport anymore. It's I've got to try and earn something to actually do it first. So I would urge, when you come back to enjoyment, is where can you put the enjoyment part, and be explicit with them. Don't be afraid to say, right guys, and play the role of grumpy coach if you need to. Say, I'm always on your case about listening and making sure you're in the right positions. At this part, have fun playing football. And see, if you want to do 5v2, because play it 5v2, and then see how it doesn't become fun because there's 5 players versus 2, and actually that fun element goes out of it. See what I mean? Let them explore what fun means to them in football, because you might get some nuggets from it. You might notice that they really enjoy a part of it that you didn't expect them to, and then you can implement that into sessions generally.
Nice, great. What would you say, if people are listening to this now, and if there's now coaches out there, hopefully, if there's coaches
they haven't been just gone to sleep by now.
Coaches that go, do you know what, that's what I'm passionate about. It's working with children with disability, or I love sport, but they don't know that this is like a world they can get into. You're quite unique, as in you've set up inclusive sport, you've now grown up to your own business, which has a lot of staff. What pathways are there for people that want to get into the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, and Joe, what? It's a really sad answer if we're going generally now, because we're going to be listening to people all over the place. Our success as a company has come from where there's no one else doing what we're doing. So there's already that. I have a coach, one of my team, that went to university, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this. I won't say her name because it might embarrass her, but she went to university and she specialised in SEN. There's only a few unis in England that you can do like a special educational needs sport-based qualification. Forgive me for not remembering the exact title, I don't want to ruin it, but basically she was inspired younger to actually work with this population group, so she wanted her degree to be reflective of that and not just do a standard sport degree so she had to go somewhere to get it first thing. She did her degree, she did loads of community placements around people with limited visibility and veterans and things, and she was like, this is so for me. She graduated wherever she was, I can't remember, and wanted to stay where she graduated, but there was no work. There was nowhere to put her expertise into action in a company where she could just work with those groups. And then she moved back home, which was Thanet, and she happened to see one of our hoodies in River Island where she's working. Oh, that sounds more like what I want. And she's now one of our head coaches, and she absolutely loves it. So I'd say, unfortunately, there's not enough that screams out inclusion generally in sports coaching. But what you can do is find your own space. Because I would urge anyone that does feel passionate about this population group, and if you are that passionate, get in touch with us anyway, because there might be opportunities to reach out down the line. But I would say if you're really that passionate, you can keep yourself up to date with inclusive training through things that we deliver, ADAPT model. There's also generally every good and governing body, is that the right term for sport?
Yeah.
National governing body. So that's the FA, for example, LTA, Rugby Federation, I can't remember the exact terminology. Generally, in their CPD pathway, there'll be a disability module, or unfortunately, it's sometimes an add-on. And that's a whole other debate for me, where I'm going, why is it an add-on when so much of our population are disabled? You're basically saying to coaches, you can do that bit if you want to, rather than it should be just part of the core training. So that's a different one. But generally, at this point, a lot of them are add-ons, disability coaching. So immerse yourself in all that training. You'll soon realise there's not that much in there that's groundbreaking. It's actually all the things we are talking about today, about being compassionate, empathetic, listening, understanding, patient, organised. And then it's about, okay, you might need to start things yourself. You might need to go, right, I'm going to take a punt here and I'm going to start running inclusive sessions in the community, at a school hall or at a sports field or whatever environment. And you will get people coming along, because as I said at the start, there's not enough nationally. There are charities that are representative, so you've got London-based charities, which is often where most things are. But again, they're doing a more charity approach to awareness and advocacy, things like that, not in the sense that our business operate, where we're delivering in communities and things. So I'd love to turn around to you and say, oh, there's all these great companies across the country, because unfortunately, as far as I know, there isn't, but there is an audience waiting for you. So if you're like, I'm wearing a different top today, which is inclusive fitness, because we're going to move what we're doing into a new company in a gym environment. So we're opening up a gym in Whitstable, because this population group are just as afraid to go into gyms as they are into the community to play sport. And I think gyms particularly probably even worse. So there are audiences waiting for you. There are children, young people, or people with different needs waiting to engage sport in your area. It just might be you need to give it, you might need to be brave enough to start.
So you mentioned the gyms there.
Mm-hmm.
What is what's the next steps for you in the future of the company?
Very good question, and I have to monitor my expectations here, don't I? So my original plan, as I think you know, is the franchise model for inclusive sport. So I was in a process of doing that, mainly because of what we just said a minute ago. There's not enough doing what we're doing, and the only way we can grow to the different areas in the country is through the franchise model. So that was in the process, and then I had an opportunity to secure premises for a gym. And it was always my dream. Since retiring very young from football, as you know, I got into health and fitness to keep myself in good nick-ish. And as my 10 years of training in different gym environments, I realised there's another gap here for what we're calling entry to exercise. So a bit like, you said I'm quite different I'm sporty, but we are actually working on the people that are just starting sport. Same in the gym. Every gym owner is, okay, I need to be careful what I say. Most or the majority of gym owners are like the egotistical PE teacher. They're doing it because they love training, they love how they look, they love the aesthetics. And the environments that they own represent that, it portrays that. Whereas for some people who want to just learn how to be healthy and active, a gym environment's not for them. Loads of mirrors, so they can't escape from being looked at. Loud music's blaring, selfie sticks everywhere, tripods everywhere. So we're bringing in the kind of values we have for inclusive sport in a gym environment where people can be part of a community, they're welcomed when they come in, how are you, they're supported, and it's about the well-being element of being active, not how I look in the mirror and how many reps or sets. Is actually how much fun and happy can I be in the gym. So we've done that this year. It's opening on the 31st of August, this month, so exciting times. Letting that embedding, get back to the franchise, get that offered out locally, hopefully, because I think, as you've given me advice before, starting local before you start scaling up is important. And then hopefully that would be me in regards to inclusive sport, inclusive fitness, I think, and carrying on the ADAPT training. So I'm in a fortunate position. The ADAPT model has been put in AFP, the Association for PE Teachers Journal, this summer. It's got a bit of traction from being that, because it's like the your Grassroots is a membership thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
AFP's like that for PE teachers.
Yeah.
It's been going for years, so it's the main one. So it's been in there this summer. Got quite a bit of traction from. It was endorsed by my old PE lecturer, so she did the academic part of it because you have to be a journal to go in there, and I'm not doing any more essays. So she was like, "Well, you just give me the adapt model, and I'll do the journal." So I was really lucky. That's gone into there. So she now wants me to get it published. So like steps published.
Yeah.
So my last bit of legacy, we look back and go, what did I actually do? Love all the stuff we do in the community, love all the impact we have, but for me personally, to leave behind a training model that's established to help people, include people in sport, that's the goal. So the ADAPT model being published in textbooks, that's where I'm working towards that's my hobby, academic work I'm doing at the moment, alongside the operational inclusive fitness and sport.
Excellent. So we'll just finish off then. What is one piece of advice you'd like to give to grassroots coaches when it comes to making their sessions more inclusive? You have to give one bit of advice, what would it be?
Smile. Honestly, it sounds fluffy.
Yeah.
But if you see any of our coaches in action with all these different population groups, one thing they all have in common is they're smiling and they're welcoming.
Brilliant. So just before we go, where can we find you on social media, Inclusive Sport on social media?
So we're on both companies are on the general socials at Inclusive Sport for the sports side of things that I've talked a lot about today. The gym's at Inclusive Fitness. Different handles have slightly different versions of it because of what's already been taken. So just generally put it in, you'll find it. Look out for the logo, which is a heart-shaped logo with our Inclusive Sport Fitness underneath it. And you'll find all the work that we're doing there. I am only on LinkedIn personally, so if anyone listening wants any personal support in regards to helping children with additional needs in their sessions or environments, you'll find me on LinkedIn, and it's Tom Tsangarides, so I'll spell that Tsangarides.
Excellent. Tom, that's honestly so useful.
Thank you.
There's so many little nuggets in there as well, which people will take away, including myself. I'll take a lot away from that, and good luck with the gym opening and all the training and everything else.
I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon at the gym, won't I?
Yeah, definitely.
Cheers, Seb. Good fun.